Today is May 28th, 2008. I am Eric Mishnick, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Colum, North Dakota. Can you please state your full name for us?
My name is Audrey Fregien, Audrey Lemke Fregien from Colum.
Okay. And when and where were you born?
I was born, at the time it was known as Wirch, North Dakota. Later on the address was Forbes, and then later on it was still Colum. So right now I guess that area is known as Ashley, North Dakota, but it was 15 miles south of Colum.
Okay. Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
No, they thought I was going to die because I was the skinniest kid that ever lived. My aunt said, when I saw you, I didn't think you were going to make the winter, she said.
Were you born out on your farm, or were
Yes.
you born in town?
No, out on the farm.
Okay. And was there a midwife or a doctor present?
Dr. Fred W. Ferguson.
Okay. Can you share some of your earliest memories with us?
Oh, I don't know. The wind-blown days from the drought, I remember those, and probably being outdoors and being in the wind and just being out in the farm, you know, with animals and chickens and dogs and cats and and having cattle around and stuff like that, yeah.
Okay. Speaking of being around the farm, can you tell us some of the chores you did on your farm?
Oh, mow the lawn. I did a lot of that. Feeding chickens, gathering eggs, walking around on the prairie looking for turkey eggs because they always tended to find a buckbrush spot someplace out in no man's land to lay their eggs. And you would go out hunting for them. So those were some of the things we did. And sitting the hens and crawling in under some double boxes and stuff and taking feed in for them and water and stuff until they hatched and stuff like that.
Okay. Did you have to help with the cooking?
Yeah, I did some. I usually ended up peeling the potatoes and getting stuff going, running to the cellar to get this and running out to the well to get water and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Did your dad ever help with the household tasks?
Oh, heavens, no. If my mother wasn't there and he'd have to cook for himself, my mother used to say, he always made sure when he made he had to have coffee. He did make coffee for himself. Of course, he put cream and sugar in, but she says when he set the cup down, he always made sure that he set it in the same ring that it left last time.
You mentioned your mom putting on the water on the stove to do laundry. How did she do laundry?
Well, we had a Maytag machine with a gas engine under it, and of course the evening before usually, or sometimes it got to be in the morning, you had to carry that water in from the well. We also had a tank near the house that if it was enough rain, why we would have water in that, and you would use that to wash clothes. But if you didn't have enough, you got it from the well, and you had to carry it in. So she had an oblong wash boiler that covered 2 burners, and that would, you fill that up and you had enough water to wash clothes with. Yeah, and you would of course have your machine, and you had to have the exhaust pipe going outside or else you could have annihilated yourself. Yeah.
And did she make her own soap to do the laundry?
She did some, yeah. She did. I remember when she used to make soap. In fact, sometimes what they did, I think the sisters got together and made some soap. And I know later on, I think my aunt made it, and we always got some from that. So we did make soap. But later on, I remember when we used bought soap, and my mother used to wash for Grandma and Grandpa, and when they didn't have, Grandma always would send a bar of P&G soap along, and Mom didn't like P&G soap, so we had quite a stash of that.
When your mom made soap, do you remember how she made it?
Not too, I don't really recall. I know they used lye and all the fat from, from butchering or whatever was left, drippings really is what they used. So I know they had to use lye and all that stuff. I don't remember too much about that.
And how would you dry the clothes after they were washed?
You would hang them out. You would hang them out, even in the wintertime when it was 20 below, and then you would bring them in and you'd set them around the house until they collapsed.
Did your mother ever do a lot of field work?
Yeah, she did help out in the field. Her job mostly was raking hay. When we made hay, that was she went out too. Like when we picked rocks, everybody went out, and or like when fixing fence, you'd go along. You'd have to have two people, and then you'd do that. But when we made hay, everybody was out there. I was on the stack, and I hated that job with a passion. I'll tell you, you were so itchy and peakery when you got off of there, and I was always afraid I got balled out so much because I was always afraid to push the hay far enough to the outside. I was afraid I was going to fall off, and so the stacks were kind of funny shaped sometimes.
Did you ever have any differences between winter and summer chores?
Yeah, because our house was so small, so in the winter we had to bring the cream separator in the house. And we never milked a lot of cows. Probably the most we ever milked was probably 6 or 8. But still you had to separate, and so in the wintertime the separator had to be brought in the house. And then in a 2-room house, that was really something, And in the summertime, of course, then we could move that out, and we had a garage, and that was moved to the garage, then the separator, and so was the washing machine. So then we had quite a bit more room in the house. But in the wintertime, it got to be a little crowded. And then especially if you had to hang your clothes up in the house yet sometimes, because we had, Mom had some of these strings that would attach to, well, the far end of the room, and then on top of the door on the other end, and, till they were dry. It would take a day or more, till probably a day, and then by the next morning you could take all that stuff off. So the humidity was high in the house, but that was all you had because you didn't have a dryer.
Were there any chores that you enjoyed?
Oh, I don't know. It didn't make any difference. It was all stuff you had to do, and you didn't give it a thought whether you liked it or not. You just did it.
Okay. Were there any chores besides the hay chore that you really did not like to do?
Oh, I don't know. I can't think of anything. Depending on the weather, if it was rainy, then you hated anything. Or else, if it was too nasty, like in the wintertime, too nasty to go out or something like that. But you had to, take warm water out for the chickens in the wintertime and go in the chicken coop and get the eggs. And I know I hated to wash dirty eggs. That was another job that was not so hot. Yeah.
You mentioned butchering several times. Can you describe a typical butchering day?
Well, usually the neighbors were asked to help, and of course they would help back. You'd help them back and stuff like that. But it usually was kind of that usually went on when I was in school, so I really wasn't around. But I do remember coming home from school, and especially when they did all the geese, and we'd always have liver and onions that night, and I just love liver and onions. We had that, and then of course you had to Mom would render the fat, and so that was a project in itself, because from 28 geese you had quite a bit, or 25, whatever the crop was that year. And so then there were cracklings, left over from that, and my folks liked to eat them. I never liked them, but my folks thought they were pretty good. I never cared for them, and so they would eat those, and that was another thing that went with some of the meals and stuff. But those are about the memories that I have of butchering, really. And then, of course, there was canning that went on and on and on. And then, of course, all those jars had to be carried down. We had a cellar hole under the house that wasn't even cemented out decent. It was just a hole, and it was. We had the canned stuff. In the wintertime, that was okay, but in the summertime, I didn't want to go down there because there were lizards down there. And I didn't like that at all. You went down there and you came up mighty fast.
Did your family make any sausage?
Oh, yeah.
For the butchering?
Yeah. That was usually my folks set up in the garage to do that, to do the butchering, and then you usually had some kind of a burner out there that you could fry it and taste it if you had it seasoned properly. You would taste it as you went on mixing it, to see if it was seasoned okay, and so that was one of the things that was done. And then later on, of course, the sausage was smoked then, and that usually was together. Then usually you butchered your critter about the same time you did the geese, just a few days in between, and then you put the goose drumsticks and legs into a salt brine, and when they were in there for several days, and then you would take them out and smoke them, and those were always good. Yeah.
Okay. You've mentioned asparagus and strawberries and some of the other foods you've eaten. What other foods did you typically eat?
Well, lots of radishes, and we had, of course, the rhubarb pie that we had for dessert, and so it was mostly homegrown stuff that you had in the garden. We also had peppers all the time and tomatoes, and in the summertime, and of course then there were plums at the time. I don't remember that we had apple trees. We didn't have any, but and I don't know. Grandpa had some, I know, but whether they were bearing, I don't remember apples till later on. And I remember he even had a walnut tree, and I remember there were walnuts on there, but they were so hard. They were, they have to season, I guess, or I don't know if they call it getting ripe or what, because they have a very hard shell. I mean, you have to have a pretty good hammer to get that shell off, and then the walnut is in there. I remember that, but we had choke cherries and plums that we had, and before my folks' trees were big enough to bear, we would go down to what you would call the gulch, and there were volunteer trees down there, and they would bear a lot, and you'd get it there, and then you'd make jam out of that, and eat your fill too. So yeah.
How did your mother make the jam?
Well, she usually made a large batch of juice. She started out making juice out of all that, and I know she would put it in various jars, and then she would make a batch at a time. She wouldn't make all of it at one time. She would make, maybe 6, 7 pints at a time, and then say have a gallon of this in the cellar, and then when she wanted some later on, make it then, is what she did.
Did you have any favorite dishes besides the pumpkin turnovers?
Oh, I loved strudels. They were absolutely super. And, let's see, what else do we like? We had what you call kichla, and that was good. It was a dough that you cut, or you'd roll them out, and then you'd have cut slits in them, and you would have deep fry them, and that was always good. And then when you had bread, when they baked bread, you'd have fry bread, or else you would have make dumplings, whatever you chose to make. And so those were some of the favorite dishes. Yeah, very good.
Did you have any least favorite dishes?
Milk. I don't like to drink milk. I still don't. Never did like it. Oh, I don't know. Oh, and my mother used to make, when she made noodle soup sometimes, and she would fix what they would call milk noodles, and that I didn't eat. That I did not like. So that had milk in it. I still don't. So that's probably what I'd least liked. Yeah.
When people came over to visit, what types of foods would you serve then?
Well, now what do you mean? For a dinner or for just in the evening come visit?
Just in the evening when they
Just in the evening. You know, years ago when you didn't have a phone, occasionally the neighbors would just pop in. You know, you didn't have any forewarning or anything like that. But, well, usually if you had something baked, you'd have that with coffee or something. Sometimes in the wintertime you'd make homemade ice cream, you know, and have that, and maybe you'd have some cookies, or if you had some cake, and, you know, whatever you had on hand you would have. And so those were some of the things. And I know quite often there were, usually in the fall you'd buy a box of apples or something like that, and you'd have apples too, you know, until they were all gone. And so it depended whatever you had. So, yeah.
Do you remember how you made your homemade ice cream?
Well, you had to have cream for one thing, and your sugar and eggs, and I don't know, there were various recipes. I remember one time our neighbor was in the service at the time, and he came home on furlough, and there were three, well, there were more boys in the family, but usually when they came to our house, there were three of the boys, and the grandma came along. There were two girls. They were grown-ups, most of them. They were older than I was. And I remember he came home on furlough, and so when he came, then we made homemade ice cream. And that time we had butterscotch ice cream. I remember that. And I thought it was awfully good. Yeah. So you would, you know, sometimes you just had plain vanilla ice cream, but of course that was special, and so we made butterscotch ice cream. I remember, or it had butterscotch flavoring. I don't know how it was made, whether you used a pudding mix in it or what. I don't recall, but I remember that. So that was different.
Okay. What about when you had people over for dinner and you knew they were coming and it was a celebration type
Yeah.
thing? What would you have then?
Oh, probably chicken or goose. We always had a lot of goose meat. In fact, when Mom made strudels, she always used goose meat for that. And we would have that, and probably mashed potatoes and gravy, and probably cranberries and stuff like that. Yeah, so it was always a good dinner, and we probably would have pie for dessert. Yeah.
Okay. How often did you take baths when you were growing up?
Saturday nights. Yeah, you didn't have running water, and you had a tub, and you heated the water, and so that's about the way that went. Yeah. And then later on, when my dad built what we called a bathhouse, this was for the summertime, and it looked when you looked at it, it looked like an outhouse. But what happened? He put a 15-gallon barrel on the top, and then put a shower head in the inside, and it was close to this little slough, and he had a little pump on it. It was a hand pump, but you pumped the water up into that, and the sun would warm it, and so you'd have warm water. So in harvest time, we usually had that. And so that was real nice, because then you could take a bath every day, or a shower every day. So that worked just fine.
When you had to take baths, did you have to share the water?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, unless you wanted to run out and get some.
Did you have a particular order of who got to take the baths first?
I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just whoever was willing or anxious, or depending on the situation. Yeah.
Okay. How often were you supposed to brush your teeth?
Every day. Every day. I don't know that it happened. I spent most of my life at the dentist. Or a great share of my life at the dentist, because I remember one time I went to the dentist. I was I suppose I was maybe 13 years old or so. And the dentist said, by the time you're 18, you're going to have dentures. And I'm a little bit past 18 and I don't have any dentures yet. But I spent a lot of time in the dental chair.
How far away was the nearest dentist?
Cullum, 15 miles. But I had a lot of dental work done in Ellendale. That was 30 miles away. But they had two dentists. It depended on where you needed to go. You didn't really always have an appointment. You walked in and you were able to get in quite often, or else you'd have to wait for 20 minutes or half an hour or something, and you'd get in. And I know I went to Doc Coleman in Allendale. I went to Doc Crabtree in Allendale. I went to Doc Rentz in Cullum. Those three were the three dentists that I had gone to most. You know. And then my uncle was a dentist later on. Then, when I went down to Chicago, and he fixed my teeth down there also, and I've had them fixed wherever I've gone.
And what about an optometrist? How?
The first, when I noticed I was complaining about not seeing right, and my folks took me to Dr. Lynn in Ellendale. And he was a country doctor. Everybody knew Doc Lynn. He was above, his brother Guy had the Chrysler dealership in Ellendale, and he had his medical practice upstairs. And that's where I got my first glasses. But my mother had a lot of problems, and she had to have eye exercises done. She had stigmatism, and they were trying to balance up her eyes, and so she went to some treatments in Oaks. They had some kind of machine that would kept moving back and forth and moving back and forth. And I know she used to come home and she had such headaches, such terrible headaches from that. I don't know if it benefited her or not, but anyway, she had taken those treatments for a while. But she did not get her glasses from Doc Lynn, but I did, my first ones. So, and after that, I went to an optometrist, and a real one.
Okay. Where was the nearest doctor?
Cullum, actually. Doc Ferguson was the doctor here. He had an office up on Main Street. The building isn't there anymore, but he had his practice there. Mm-hmm.
Did you go into town very much for the doctor?
Well, sometimes you needed to if you didn't, if something was wrong or you felt you needed to go to the doctor, but for the most part you didn't go unless something was very seriously wrong, and I don't recall that we ever had any real emergencies or anything like that. So.
Did your parents have any home remedies for the minor problems?
I remember my dad used to buy a bottle of whiskey in the fall, and that was our medicine over the winter. Everybody would get a tablespoon, and that was it. I suppose there were some remedies. I don't recall that there was anything special about any of them. So, but, you had, well, I don't know that we even had Vicks. Sometimes when you had a sore throat, you took a wet sock and wrapped it around your throat, and by morning that was better. You usually wet the end of it and then wrap the dry part around you, and my mother always knew just what kind of sore throat have you got. Does it hurt when you do it this way, or does it hurt when you swallow, or does it hurt when you talk? And then she could figure out, and then one of them required the wet sock, and I don't know what the other one did.
All right. Speaking of alcohol, what was your family's attitude towards alcohol?
I don't know. There was just, like I say, my dad would buy a bottle in the fall, and that would last all winter, for if you had a cold or anything like that. And so in the summertime, he would buy a case of beer, and that lasted him through harvest time, and that was usually about it. And I know my mother, later on from choke cherries, my mother made wine, and and bottled that. But I know nobody ever had a problem with it, but it was there. When we had it, it was there. When we didn't have it, it wasn't there.
What types of clothes were common when you were growing up?
Mostly homemade. My clothes were all homemade. I don't think I had anything bought till I think I got my first bought dress when I was about 13, probably 12 or 13. I remember I got a bought dress. My clothes were all homemade. My mother used to sew for her sister. My mother did a lot of sewing, and my coats were even homemade. And usually the other sisters or the family, when after Grandpa died, Grandpa had a lot of suits. He bought a bunch of suits when he went over to Germany, bought new clothes and stuff. And when he died, Mom got all these clothes, and she took them apart and made dresses for me. I had wool dresses, and believe me, they were itchy. I had a lot of, well, everything was homemade. Or else if the sisters had something left over from, this one sister that she sewed, her youngest sister was a school teacher, and she sewed for her. And if there was something left over, I usually got a blouse out of it or something. But my clothes were all homemade. So it was, and she sewed very well. They didn't look homemade. A lot of homemade clothes look homemade, but they didn't look homemade. So, and she was pretty particular about how it was done. So, yeah.
Okay. What about your shoes? Were they store-bought or were those homemade too?
No, they were store-bought. They were store-bought. You'd get a pair in the fall, and you'd have one pair of that you would wear to school, or when you outgrew them. After you had, in summertime, sometimes the ones from the summer before, you'd get a pair of dress shoes, and then, if they got too short, you'd cut the front end out and you'd wear them. And I remember there was a style when I was about a fifth grader. They had what you call jodhpurs. They were like riding breeches, and I know I had a pair of those, and then I got a pair of boots, and I wore boots and those jodhpurs to school in the wintertime, and I just loved them. They were so comfortable. And then my folks even got me of course it was country school, nobody cared, and I got a brand new sheepskin coat, and I wore that to school. Of course, you didn't wear it for dress, but I wore it for school and outdoors. Very warm and comfortable, yeah.
Okay. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about holidays a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We've already touched on Christmas. Did your family celebrate Easter?
Yeah, there were always dyed eggs, and it was always a deal where the Easter rabbit came, and I always had something on Easter morning in the kitchen. There was always something for me. Mom had said something out the night before because I thought it was the Easter rabbit, and had that. At Christmas time, there was always a tree, and when there wasn't a tree, my mother had an artificial tree that I know I've seen them in some of the. When I was in Europe, we were at a Christmas shop, and I saw a tree like that, and what they're made out of is they dye feathers, and then they wrap these feathers around a little piece, a sliver of wood or a wire, I'm not sure, and it looks like needles of a tree. And of course, they don't have many branches, but it was so loaded down with decorations that you couldn't tell that there weren't many branches there. And then, of course, you had the wax candles that you had on there. It wasn't a very big tree. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 3 feet tall, something like that. And we didn't have much room in the house, so it had to sit on top of we had a little chest of drawers, and it would sit on top of that, or sometimes on top of the sewing machine. It would sit there, but we had one. If we didn't have a real one, we would have that. So there was always something, and I know some years there wasn't money my folks didn't have money for Christmas presents or anything, and I remember one year my mother fixed up clothes for my doll. she washed the doll and fixed her hair and sewed her some dresses, and that was my gift. Yeah, so there was always something. Yeah.
What was your doll made out of?
Uh, Depending on what year it was. Later on, I had a doll. I don't know what they were made out of, really. They looked like they had hair, but they didn't. You know, it was just in the mold of whatever it was. But and then before they had some that were kind of stuffed, I think, with something, I don't know, straw maybe or something that they were stuffed with. So I really never was much into playing with dolls. I mean, I love paper dolls. I loved those, and I could play with those for hours. But dolls was not one of my. I had one, and when kids would come and I figured they were too rough, I'd hide it. Yeah.
Did your family celebrate the 4th of July?
If there was a celebration someplace, we would go, but a lot of times there wasn't. Sometimes we would go to the battlefield. There's a battlefield out here. It's about 12 miles from town here, south, and it has a museum and a large statue up on the hill where one of the famous Indian battles was fought. And they every once in a while would have a celebration out there. So it was usually we did something special, but you know, you didn't go to a lake. Most of the lakes were dried up, you know. So we did something special usually, but you never knew what that was. It depended. If there was a celebration in town, we would go to town, you know, or something, but we usually had something, yeah.
Okay. Did your family celebrate birthdays?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we did. If the, you know, if like say for instance you were going to go visit and they happened to have a birthday, well then you know you did something about it. You know, you had cake and something like that. As a kid growing up, I had birthday parties. We had an outdoor fireplace, and so what they would do is invite the whole school, which was like 6 kids and the teacher or something like that, you know, and then they would have, we would have, you know, birthday cake and lunch and probably have hot dogs or something like that. So that was done several years in a row. We also had some of our school picnics at our place because we had the fireplace and a picnic table. And so we had, our schools would let out, and so we'd have a picnic on the last day of school. And if we had it on a Sunday, then some of the parents would come too. Yeah.
What about Halloween? Did you ever celebrate Halloween?
Not much. You hear all these stories how families, the bigger families, how they played tricks and stuff like that, but really, not really, no.
Did you celebrate Valentine's Day at school?
Yes, yes. We would. The teacher would usually make a nice, fancy box, and we would all exchange Valentines. Of course, we would also make some, you know, but you still had a bought one for everybody. You know, you could buy them in the packs, and there was probably 12 or a dozen in there, or whatever, 2 dozen or whatever was in there. So everybody would get a bought one, but you would also make some, and you would exchange them among your schoolmates. Yeah.
And lastly, did you ever celebrate New Year's?
Not much. Not unless we were invited someplace, and the adults would play cards, and I don't really recall that we did much on New Year's. You know.
Ask you some questions about growing up on the plains now.
Oh, really?
What was it like growing up on the plains?
Oh, I don't know. I don't even know how to answer that. It was, I don't know, you just grew up and watched the trees grow and and just being out there, you know, I mean, you didn't do anything special, you know. There was, you know, out in the field, or else you'd go out if there was something to do, you'd help, and I can't say that it was any different than just plain everyday life,
Okay. Was there anything that you found beautiful or enjoyable about the plains?
I think the tranquility was absolutely fabulous. It's beautiful. I remember even after I was married sometimes, and I would, of course, we didn't have later on we had a riding lawnmower, but a lot of times when I was done mowing the lawn, I would just lay and watch the clouds. And, you could just watch them reforming and reshaping, and you would listen to the wildlife or hear the coyotes howl at night. I miss that. I wouldn't mind hearing some again. Well, I have heard them here in town. I came home one night and I was standing out here on the steps and I could hear them howl out southeast of town. But I think the tranquility when I was still home, I was in high school, and about 6 miles southeast of us, was it the government or whatever, put up 2 huge towers. It was north of number 11 going to Ellendale. And of course they had lights on them. And it just gave you a feeling that you were being infringed on. I mean, here you had this whole prairie to yourself, but still you didn't have this all this time, and all of a sudden this was there. It was just like it was infringing on you, but there's a certain tranquility out on the farm that you will never have in town. No way. And I do miss it. I do miss it. It's just, there's something about, and I love to take a walk out at night when the moon is full out in the country and people say, aren't you scared? Well, what am I scared of? You can hear a pheasant over there. You can hear, way off, you can hear a car going someplace. Some other place you can hear a dog bark. Then you could hear a coyote howl. Then you could hear some geese squawking someplace, And you don't have that in town. Yeah.
Was there anything that you found bleak or unpleasant about the plains?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's just something the way it was, and that's the way it was, and you never gave it a thought because that's the way it was.
Your family was very much into trees and plants
yeah.
and horticulture. Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy having more trees on your property, or did you like your property when there were less trees on it?
Oh no, you need a lot of trees. Still do. I can't imagine anybody living on a place and not having trees. I can't imagine living like that, because the wind blows in North Dakota and you want trees around your place. So yeah, I have to cut this one down out here, and I'm just really, I don't want to do this. But I'm going to have to, because it's interfering with my drainage here and stuff, and I'm going to have to cut it down. So I told all my lady friends that I have coffee with that we'll cut it down, and then they can all come to the funeral.
What were winters typically like for you growing up?
I think it was a nice time in the winter when you, if it was warm enough in the house, I don't know. Of course, I never was out there that I had to help with feeding cattle or anything like that, but it's a time that you can do things that you don't do in the summertime. You can catch up with your reading. You do sewing, fancy work, whatever, do things that you don't do in the summertime, So, oh.
You mentioned your mother sewed. Did she embroider or do anything
Oh yeah,
else like that?
I did a lot of that myself. When I was in the 7th and 8th grade, I don't know how many sets of dish towels I made, and pillowcases. I did a lot of embroidery. My mother crocheted, although she sewed a lot too. And later on I took a dressmaking course, and I also took a tailoring course. So I did a lot of sewing. I sewed all my daughter's clothes when she was in college. She had all her homemade clothes, and she still likes them. She says, she says, I don't like this bought stuff. It never fits. And she lives up in Canada, in Edmonton, Alberta, and I used to sew her dresses for her birthday all the time, and I have a dress form, so they usually fit pretty good, you know. And so it was something I enjoyed doing, but I have cut back a lot. I don't do it. I push myself. You know, I start making something, I probably start, see, I'm starting a dress on Tuesday, and all of a sudden I think, oh, there's a party on Thursday night. I bet I can have this dress done, and I will drive everybody nuts, because then I start getting myself all tied up in my neck here and stuff, and so I've cut back a lot. And the grandchildren are to the point now where they want to pick their own things, and so I don't sew much anymore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever get snowed in at your place?
Oh, yes. 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 Oh, yes. And we would, I remember when I went to high school, my folks got so snowed in, they didn't get to town for 2 or 3 weeks. And at the time I was boarding in town. You would board in town. And I just wanted to get home, and 56 was blocked. It was like driving in a hallway for probably 10 miles south of town. It was just, I mean, it was higher than a car on both sides once the roads were open. And they had, it was just, you know, quite an experience. And I thought, well, I know they're out of some groceries, but, you know, no telephone, you don't know what they're out of. And I remember I walked from Highway 56. I walked from Highway 56, and I went and I took a shortcut, which was stupid. And I kept breaking down, and oh, I got such a horrible cold afterwards. I got so sweaty, and I had to walk back on Sundays because I was I was going with the neighbors because they could get out, and I was sick. You were snowbound quite often. That was not unusual. That was not unusual. Yeah. And you had to prepare, you know, in the fall you'd buy, you know, probably 600, 700, 800 pounds of flour and store it, you know, so that if you didn't get to town, you at least had that. You would store up things, you know.
What was fall typically like for you?
Well, usually thrashing, you know, or harvesting, you know. Later on, of course, it was combining, and then it wasn't such a big deal. But in the years ago, it was thrashing, you know, and you always had, you know, either my mother and I were home alone because my dad was off someplace thrashing for the neighbors, or else if they were at our place, well, if the weather was good, why, you would be done in a few days. But if you'd hit a rainy season, well, then it could go on for quite a while. Yeah, it could last quite a while, but yeah, it was always a lot of, oh, my mother cooked a lot because you'd have them for dinner, and years earlier, you know, well, they'd always take lunch out for them too, you know, so you had that, and way early, I know they even had breakfast, you know, so it was a lot of cooking and a lot of guys, you know, and our house was so small. My mother made an extension for the table. She hammered some boards together and some props, and so she could push it underneath the framework and fasten it to the table somehow, so we could have some more, so there was room for all the guys at the table. If it was nice, they could eat outside. So.
Okay. When threshing crews weren't there and it was just your family, did you have a regular seating arrangement at the table?
When it wasn't threshing, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Yeah, we had, my mother had her spot, my dad had his spot, and I had mine, and so that was it. Yeah.
What were summers typically like for you?
Oh, lawn mowing, I suppose. I did a lot of lawn mowing and picking strawberries and, oh, I don't know, feeding the chickens, and that was about it. Oh, we had, for a while there, we had just had one cow, and then a lot of times I would milk that cow. And during the summer, later on, we didn't have much livestock, and but earlier there was chores to do, and you had to help with the milking. Yeah.
Okay. And last but not least, can Can you describe a typical spring?
A lot of mud, getting stuck, trying to get out, and it was kind of a problem because you didn't have decent roads, and you would tend to get stuck. And if you didn't make a run for some of those mud holes, you didn't make it. Yeah. So I remember one time I walked home from school, and the track had been built up from the sled, going in the wintertime with the sled. Well, of course, that didn't thaw as easily as the rest of the stuff. And I walked home from school one time, and our mailbox was a half a mile south, so I would stop and pick up the mail on the way home. And I was a ways down the road, and I stepped down, and I went down to here. I mean, I went down, and of course, you wore cotton stockings, and they were just sopping wet. And, well, I walked all the way home like that, but that was kind of unexpected. Yeah.
Okay. Of all those seasons, what was your favorite?
Oh, I don't know. Summer was nice out at our place because our yard was always so nice. You know, there was a lot of flowers and a lot of watering and a lot of birds around, and a lot of people would just come from, when they had company, they'd bring their company to see our yard because it was kind of like a park. And so, you know, to see the flowers and all that. We had a mailbox out in the garden, and on the side it said, "Leave your signature, please." And so even if we weren't home, sometimes people were there and they'd leave their names, you know. We had people from different countries and different states, and I still have some of those books. I think I have about 3 of them. Yeah. So it was a good experience. It was very nice. I miss it. You know, it was so nice that I miss it. Yeah.
All right. What was your most stressful childhood experience?
I don't know, probably when our house burned down. Probably. Yeah, that, you know, it took, you know, well, that was in August of 45, and then, you know, they didn't get started on the house till 46, and then we lived in the basement the winter of 46, 47, and then the next winter were able to move upstairs, but because you couldn't get the stuff you needed, it took a long time to build it, and the fellow that lives down the street, the house that is, well, next to me is the fourplex here, and beyond that is another house, and those people were building that house at the same time my folks built. Those people are no longer living, but this man, he tore down an old house and he built that one, but there were things he needed, you know, new wood and windows and stuff like that, and he wasn't able to buy them. And being that my folks' was an emergency thing and we had a permit to buy, so he always said, "Well, you buy it. If you can get it," he says, "you buy it and I'll pay you for it." And so that's how they got some of their stuff.
All right. What was your happiest childhood memory?
Gee, I don't know. I think when the cousins came to visit, maybe. Yeah, that was fun.
What was the most adventurous thing you did during your childhood?
Oh man, I don't know. Adventurous? I don't recall that I did anything adventurous. Yeah.
Is there anything else about your childhood memories that you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered everything pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
I don't know that my life was so different from anybody else's that made it different from anyone else's. I don't really know how I should answer that.
Yes. Why do you want to have? Why do you want to tell your story?
Well, I was asked to tell it. I don't know that it was so different, you know. That's all.
Are there any other thoughts or observations you'd like to share?
Oh, I think we covered everything pretty well. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you very much for
Okay.
taking time today to share your story
Yeah.
with us.
Okay.